Okay, now the class is being recorded. So, in the last class, we discussed style, and I asked you all to read this aspects of style, order and variation. On page number 30, order and variation, style and variation, style and context, style and identity, style, socioculture versus language. I asked you all to read these all because you have already studied stylistics, so you'd understand all of it. Have you all read it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am, we did.
can anyone please tell me what is aspect of style? Yes, any one of you. Page number 30. No one. There are five aspects of style: order in variation, style and context, style and identity, and style as a feature of a person's socio-culture. It's a socio-cultural aspect. These are the five aspects of style. Yes, can anyone tell me about what is style and variation? Now I'll start calling your names. Yes, Binesh. Yasir, switch off your mic. Binesh. Binesh. Switch on your mic and tell me what is style and variation.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम मैम
Walaikum
आई एम
salam.
आउट ऑफ होम बट मुझे नहीं आता ये
Okay.
बट आई एम टेकिंग द क्लास मैम
Okay, fine. Anyone else? Danish?
Ma'am, actually, I have prepared it for that day, but
Hmm.
now
You have
I'm
forgotten.
yes, ma'am. But ma'am, वो थोड़ा थोड़ा मैंने point out किया था. So, like ma'am, there is written that the variation in language is never random. In fact, it
Mhm.
is orderly. And
Yes.
then, uh, ma'am, there is that, like, for example, shows that misspelling among semi literate writer of early modern English and wide variation from one writer to the next were actually orderly representation from which contemporary regional pronunciation could be inferred.
Hmm. Which means
Which
af-
means, ma'am, like there that the variation that occur in language that is not random, rather that is orderly.
yes. How is it orderly? For example, you people have studied Chaucer, right? If you look
Yes,
at the
ma'am.
language of Chaucer and compare it with, let's suppose, Jane Austen's novel, is there any difference in the language?
Yes, ma'am. There is uh, uh, the difference is also in the eras. There is eras difference. Like Geoffrey Chaucer was in, that was in the 14th century, and then Jane Austen that very recently, not that much recently.
Hmm. Okay, why
So there is,
why is not everyone they are saying that they cannot hear my voice? Why?
ma'am, they must allow their microphones. Then they will listen it.
Okay, let me go to the settings.
अब आ रही है मैम अब ठीक हो गया है
Okay, it means that you have to allow your mic.
यस मैम
Yes, ma'am.
Let me allow participants to unmute themselves. Okay. Okay, but then there is a lot of noise.
No, ma'am, just for once they have to allow their mic, then they can unmute it and they can listen to you.
Okay, can everyone do that? That once they allow their mic, and then and then after that they can. Yes, Kainat, can you now listen to me?
जी मैम मैं सुन रही हूँ लेकिन अगर आप एक मैसेज ग्रुप में दे दें उनको क्योंकि उनको आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही तो वो सब अपना माइक जो है तो उसको अलाउ कर देंगे
Or can you ask Ejaz to do that?
Sure, ma'am, I will.
ओके मैम
अयाज है
मैम अभी आवाज आई आपकी.
You have to switch on your mic and then you have to switch it off.
over my like there is noise.
एक्चुअली मैम दिस इज आवर फर्स्ट एक्सपीरियंस
Oh, that's okay. I have taken these
I mean,
classes.
didn't get
I have taken these
taking a class
classes
on
with
here.
your seniors, but and with your juniors as well. But I think I
That's all.
had no class with you all. Actually, I have recorded lectures of
जी मैम
I have recorded lectures of forensic linguistics, but
No, did
that
you man?
is from week 7, I guess. Yes, week 7. So after that, we don't need to take these classes. Then you'll just listen to the lecture that I have already recorded, and then you can, we can have a session like this in which we can have a question answer session.
Great, ma'am.
Okay, but
ओके मैम
these lectures I haven't recorded, so I don't have them on YouTube.
No, ma'am.
Okay, and yes, I have also recorded lectures of language and gender as well. You can access those
From
on
where?
YouTube.
Okay, ma'am. Kindly share that link, ma'am.
I'll share the link with you all.
Thank
I'll
ओके
share the link. Okay. Now, if you switch off your mics, can you still listen to me?
Yes, ma'am. Assalamu alaikum, ma'am.
Walaikum assalam. Now, everyone can listen to me
यस मैम
even after switching off their mics?
you.
Yes,
Yes,
यस
ma'am.
मैम यस
Okay,
मैम
good. Now, switch off your mics, everyone, and let's just discuss this because in 40 minutes, this link is going to end, right? In 40
ओके
minutes, then I'm going to share another link, and then you have to go through the whole process once again, right?
Okay.
Okay, let's just start. So we were discussing, okay, so we were discussing order in variation, and Danish was telling us about the difference that we have got in the time when Chaucer wrote and the time when Jane Austen wrote something. So what's the difference in the language? Can you see the difference in the language? Yes, Danish.
Ma'am, the language of Chaucer that was very pure English, and that is very difficult to understand.
Yes.
While when we read this Jane Austen like Pride and Prejudice, that novel, that is quite easy. But there are also some words that is not related to this contemporary era. Like there is a word, the word handsome has been used for a girl,
Yes.
for so, ma'am, like these are the variations.
Exactly. Okay. So when we talk about order in variation, though this was the task that you all had to study, but I'm going to just give a brief overview over it because then the next chapter is linked with this one. So it's important. Okay. So we can see that there is order in variation, order in sense of time. That when you look at a text from old times, you can see the difference, and because of the choice of the language, because the style is used, because the pronunciation is such. Even when you look at the pronunciation, the way people pronounce words, you can guess very easily that from which era do they belong. Just like where, for example, in Chaucer's time, they used to pronounce night as, I don't know, khanicht, something like that. right? So these are the pronunciation differences that we have got, not only pronunciation differences but also with the choice of words as well. Then style and variation. Can anyone tell me what is what is a style and variation? Because this was something in order and variation. Can someone tell me about style and variation? Anyone?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Yes. What
Style,
is
ma'am, refers to
style?
ways of
Yes.
speaking.
Hmm.
Style refers to ways of speaking, ma'am.
Yes. So how is it linked with variation?
Ma'am,
Hmm?
variation is something that you create yourself.
Variation is something that you create yourself. It is
Yeah.
if you remember, we talked about ideolect.
Yes.
It is related to
Every,
ideolect. That is everyone's style. Okay, when once you are done with giving me answers, please switch off your mics, okay? um, when when someone is speaking or when someone is saying something, you'll find that there is difference in everyone's use of language. For example, when I'm using certain words time and again, right? Or for example, the way I pronounce a certain word might not be pronounced by someone else in that way. The stress and intonation that I use would be completely different from the way other people use it, though we all are speaking the same language. But there's this difference that comes. This variation is not that variation of language variation that we talk about. It is the variation of ideolect. The difference is that every individual has their own linguistic choices from where they choose, right? Okay, then we have style and context. How style and context are linked together? Can anyone tell me this?
Ma'am, again, please.
Yes, style and context.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum, ma'am.
Walaikum assalam. Yes.
Ma'am, I want to give the answer that
Yes.
like when we are in certain situation, we change
Mhm.
our language accordingly. So that is style and the context. Like when we are talking to an adult, our style will be totally different, and when we talk to a child, our style will be totally different.
Very good. Yes. So, style and context is that in each and every context, the language that you're using might be very different from what you are using. That is kind of a situational variation. Situation, we call it situational variation. Situational variation is that the context would influence your language, the context would influence the choice of your words. So, how is it significant in forensic linguistics? So for example, if it is order and variation, we get to know that how old was the text, or when was the text written. Or for example, if it is style and variation, so we get to know that everyone has their own individual style, so we compare the language and then we get to know that who has said it, or whether we get to know about the authorship, right? Then whether it's style and context, we get to know that whether the same person has written the same language in the same context or no, in the different context. Because when you're talking to an elder, you might say respectful words, or when you're talking to a child, you might be easygoing with them. But then we compare the same situations, and we try to find out the culprit, or we try to find out the answers for the question that a forensic linguist is trying to answer. Then the fourth point is style and identity, that we have already talked about that in the previous classes as well. If anyone would like to answer, anyone?
Ma'am, like there are different types of identities. Like there is
Mm,
culture identity, there is family's identity. Like in Pashto, we can say we can easily recognize a person that from which dialect or caste he belongs. Like we have Yusufzai dialect, we have Khatak dialect. So from these sort of words or language, we can find it out, the identity
exactly.
of a person.
Very good. Okay, so Identity, individual identity, as we've already talked about idealect, but this idealect can vary from context to context, right? But then there is another difference in that, and that difference is that each individual's identity is linked with their cultural, with their groups, and with their family identity. Now, what is group in there? We all know that cultural identity is that from where do you belong. So for example, if a Pashto speaker says something, for example, if a Pashto speaker is using the language, the way they are going to use the language, the meaning of those words or the choice of the words, they all are going to be more influential from a Pathan society, right? But if there is someone who comes from, let's suppose, Indian culture, so this the kind of a language that they are using is going to be completely different. If you see that, then we have families. So within groups, then we see families, we look at families as a something that influence the choice of the language. For example, in certain families you'll see that people use the for even elders, and people use taso for elders. This difference would tell you about the family background of the person, that whether the same person belongs to the same family or not, or whether the person said something or not. I'll give you the example from forensic linguistics. So for example, if you caught a person, a culprit who committed a crime, and that crime was committed through a blackmailing note, you have caught that person. But when you have caught that person, you want to see whether the same person has written that text, or whether the same person has called, a recorded conversation is there, has called and blackmailed the person. You'll compare the language. Once you compare the language, you have doubts over someone. Three people, for example, let's suppose three people are A, B, and C. You are believe that they are suspects. I remember I explained suspects to you. So they are suspects, but in these three, how would you know that who's the person? You'll compare the language with the family's language. That is, you'll compare that whether the person is using the same kind of language in everyday conversation, and is influenced by the language of the family, because you don't have the person in front of you right now, right? Because all the three suspects are gone. They are not with you right now. So just to be sure that whether it is the same person who has committed the crime, you are going to analyze the language of the family and then compare it with the language. Because though there is ideolect, but there are certain features that are going to be embedded in that language which cannot be changed, even if you have the ideolect, even if the choice of words are different, even if you as an individual pronounce words differently. But there are certain things that you cannot change, right? So that is the family influence. Then we have group influence on the style, and that group influence is that, um, from which social group do you belong? Do you belong to a high class family, class family, or the criminal is coming from a slum area, for example, they use very harsh language, they swear a lot, or whether the person comes from an educated background? How would you get to know that? If you look at the text messages that we send, like normally when teachers send text messages, you'll see that they normally use complete words. But if you look at the students' text messages, you'll see that they always skip out words. They'll use short form of the words. But if you look at the teacher's language, they use complete words, and they try to use complete words. So from this, you can see that from which group do they belong. Do they belong to the uh, uh, a group that is educated, or is not teenage, or you can get and guess the age limit of the person, or how professional they are. Because you'll never see a professional person using these short form of the words in a text message, especially when they are sending it to their students. So keeping these all things in mind, you'll get to know that this person belongs to which group. I hope it is clear so far. Is it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Um, there's this one last point, which is style, socioculture versus language. Can anyone explain?
Which one, ma'am?
So this is on the next page, that is on page number 32. Socioculture versus language. No answer?
Actually, we don't have our notes in our hands, so how can we reply?
Why don't you have the notes? Because I've told you that I'm taking the class. I cannot even find you
Well,
right
ma'am, you
now.
were not informed. I was just informed a few minutes ago, right? So I don't have the notes, and I'm not here
Okay, so
in
in the
my same
next
place.
class, please bring your notes, okay? Okay, so in socioculture versus language, it is that we not only talk about the like the social and the cultural perspective, not only the culture perspective, but society also plays an important role in determining the language um, of a person, right? And it is linked uh, with how the person is using the language, in how many ways the person is using the language. You may see that um, with the passage of time there is language change, or you may see that there are certain linguistic factors which may affect. Okay, in 10 minutes this link is going to end. I'm going to share in 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to share another link with you all, and you are going to join the class again. Okay, so in in social interaction, and we see that in social interaction there are certain linguistic factors which determine your choice, and these factors influence the language of not one person but also the other person. For example, when I ask a question in certain way, you would reply in the same way. Let's suppose I give you the example that if I am using a language which is you might have seen that when students come together and sit together. Okay, I'll give you my example that because I speak Pashto with my colleagues, so my interaction with Rahman is a lot. It's been some time that he is using uh, like when I say something, I say that अगर they जोड़ करे दे, like for example there is a file and there are courses, so I'll ask him that have you like आप तासो aga courses जोड़ करी दी, and the way he says it is like तासो aga courses सास करी दी. So my way of talking to him has completely changed, and sometimes I use this word sas, though it is from his perspective, though he uses it a lot. So there are certain social factors that when we talk to the same person, we use the same language. And you might have studied in sociolinguistics that when someone is used to speaking in one language, they normally speak in the same language. For example, when I speak in Pashto, I'll speak in Pashto with the same person. If I speak in English, I'll speak in English with the same people. And if I'm speaking in Urdu with my students, I'm used to speaking in Urdu with my students. And it would seem very odd if I start using another language. These are the certain factors which are associated with, social culture as well as language. They are embedded with one another. I hope it is clear so far. Let's move towards next chapter, which is time variation and genre. Okay, um, can anyone tell me, we have just discussed about time, that how time is associated with identifying authorship of a person. Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am, we
ma'am.
do.
We can hear
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
Okay, someone please tell me.
Yes.
Someone please tell me how time is associated with authorship. आप किस तरह से किसी चोर को पकड़ सकते हैं with linking it with time, language and time.
Ma'am, टाइम के साथ मैम
We just discussed
मैम
it.
टाइम के साथ लैंग्वेज में वेरिएशंस आती हैं, वर्ड्स चेंज होते हैं, तो
Yes.
मैम सवाल का समझ नहीं आया मैम।
अभी explain किया है कि how time is associated with language and then identifying the person, that is authorship.
लाइक मैम अगर कोई क्राइम हो जाए तो उसका तो इतना बड़ा वेरिएशन में हम टाइम वेरिएशन में नहीं ले सकते ना मैम। तो अगर हम पास्ट में अगर कोई क्राइम हुआ है और उसको हम अगर डिस्कस कर रहे हैं तो मैम फिर तो हो सकता है। और अगर एक मैम लाइक अगर हम कोई 1940 का कोई केस ले रहे हैं या 1950s कोई क्राइम हुआ है तो मैम तब हम रिलेट कर सकते हैं। लेकिन मैम अगर
Okay.
आज ही या कल क्राइम हुआ है तो मैम फिर तो इम्पॉसिबल है हमें टाइम के साथ
फिर तो वेरिएशन ज्यादा नहीं आ सकती ना।
Okay, let me give you an example and then you both answer. For example, there is a person who has committed crime and that person's language says that this person is using old kind of language. And then there is another person who has committed a crime and you can see that the language that is used is very, short form of the words and kind of SMS language. What would you guess from from this language?
मैम एज
तो मैम वो
एक
सस्पेक्ट
पुराना चोर एक
ओल्ड
नया
का
चोर।
होगा और ये जो होगा वो स्टूडेंट, एज से पता चलेगा।
So why is this age
एक मैम
difference?
शातिर चोर है, पहले भी चोरियां करता है, और एक जो है नया नया चोर है।
Exactly. Is it Bilal?
यस मैम
Bilal,
Yes, ma'am.
I hope you are doing well.
Yes, ma'am. Alhamdulillah.
Good. Okay. Now from this we can infer that with time, the kind of language that you see, the language that you learn with the passage of time, right? You'll remember that language forever. It's not that you're going to change it abruptly. The kind of language that nowadays teenagers speak, or the kind of language that they use nowadays is completely different from what you people are using. And the kind of language that you people are using is completely different from what we were using or we are using. And it's similar with the young generation, that nowadays kids are using English words a lot. They are forgetting their own language. Even in Pashto they are embedding. Who is making these lines? Please don't. So they are embedding all this over there, right? Embedding all of these English words in the conversation and in their languages. So when parents are talking to their kids, or when kids are talking, they are using a lot. But when two grown-ups are talking to one another, they'll use com- complete Pashto words, or if not complete, a little bit better than the way these children are using language. Are you getting my point, that why time is associated with the with
Yes, ma'am.
identifying forensic?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
it's not that time is just you'll take a text and you'll get to know that it was written in 1940s. No, when you look at the text, and you associate it with someone who wrote this text, and in the language, kind of language that they are using is associated with which area, with which field, and of which time. For example, you'll find that nowadays we don't use shall when we are speaking in English. We
यस
use
मैम
will,
यस मैम देयर
right?
इज ओनली विल
Yes, there's only will. But if you talk to people who are, not foreigners, and are not linked with language, English language a lot, and they are writing or saying something in English language, they'll try to use shall with I and we. You'll find
यस मैम
this, and
यस
this is this is the way you get to know there is change in spoken, and you get to know that there's change in the spoken. But this change uh, can be guessed, and you can easily know about the culprit, and you can find through this time that how it is, linked with authorship. Okay. In 2 minutes, this link is going to end. Can you see this cursor or something over here, or should I?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
See this high frequency lexicon test. This is a kind of a test that we can use for identifying the choice of words of a person, that how many times a person has used this term. Remember, I told you that there are, switch off the mics, please. Remember, I told you that once I told you that through comparing how many times certain word is used, you'll be able to know that you'll be able to know that who said it, right? So for example, if I use a lot of words in my conversation, but the most uh, my usual conversation is linked with let's suppose right, use a lot, and you're comparing my language with someone else. And if you remember, I told you that, for example, Sir Zulfikar uses would a lot. So when you compare these conversations and you put it to a test of high frequency lexicon test, you'll find these words highlighted. And once you find these words highlighted, you can compare it with a suicide note, you can compare it with a ransom note, you can compare it with a blackmailing note, you can compare it with the conversation, and you can easily guess who's the person, right?